Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along. I'm going to do a session around building enterprise applications on the Heroku platform. So hopefully, by the time we get to the end of it, you'll have a bit of an idea of some of the tools and the techniques that you can use to build scalable systems on the platform. I don't have a clicker. So, as is traditional, a little background about me. So I'm sure you're all expert readers and can read both that and my t-shirt, which confirms that yes, I am Rob Salesforce on Twitter. I'm also an independent Salesforce consultant. I've been working as a technical architect for a company in the network security space at the moment. It's a fantastic role because I get to work from home all the time. As you can see, I've been on the Salesforce and Heroku platforms for a little while now. Probably more Salesforce than Heroku, if I'm honest. It's still a comparative niche in the Salesforce ecosystem. And my claim to fame is I built a site called swapmyswag.com using Heroku. So if you've got excess stickers, you've got duplicates, you want to trade it for something that you've always wanted to apply to your laptop, drop by and have a look at the site. So for those of you that saw Mehdi's presentation earlier and are fluent enough in French, some of this may be a bit familiar, but for everyone else I'll just give a bit of a run through on some of Heroku's structure there. So under the hood, Heroku's kind of built out as a collection of Dinos, which are like lightweight Linux virtual machines. These are like the building blocks of your Heroku application. And they can work in isolation, but they're best used when they're coordinated and scaled out. So if you think of them as like little worker bees that are swarming together to a common goal, you can effectively swarm your Dinos to do more work in a coordinated way. Now those Dinos can have different jobs, much like you get the honey making bees and you get the soldiers that guard the hive, etc. In the same way with Dinos, you can have a web Dino, you can have a worker Dino, and these are sort of very different sort of task-based processes. And you can have one-off Dinos, which are kind of for your admin tasks. Now these Dinos can run code in a vast array of programming languages, mostly the open source ones. You're probably not going to find any .NET in there just yet, but Java, Ruby, Go, Node.js, Clojure, whole bunch more. So those Dinos are sitting on the Dino manager, which coordinates the behavior between them. And then underneath that, you have the logplex. And the logplex is for coordinating and aggregating the output of all these applications so that you can layer monitoring, reporting, and troubleshooting on top of that. So I know many of you in the audience are more Salesforce folks, so you're probably wondering, well, why do I even need Heroku? So some of the big sells, the Salesforce platform folks, there are no governor limits. It's not 100% true, but if you think of it in terms of how strict the Salesforce platform is with its limits, you've got far more scope to really sort of push the boundaries there. So no governor limits, no API limits, no SOC limits. It's a bit Wild West. You can, as I've said, you can choose your programming language, so you're not tied to just Visualforce, Apex, and JavaScript. And there's a whole market of specialized add-ons to solve a lot of the tasks that you're going to need to do already. There's Postgres, which is a relational database. There's Heroku Connect, which we'll come on to in a moment, for connecting to Salesforce. Heroku Kafka, which I'll do a bit more of a deep dive, which is kind of your main weapon for scaling out at enterprise level. So before we sort of kick into the deep dive, I'm going to be brave and attempt a demo. The demo is very lightweight. It's basically showing how to get a application down from Git. If I can, yep, there we go, and pop in there. But it does show you kind of the ease of deployment that Heroku gives us. So let's move that there. Perfect. That's probably a bit too big now. I think I've overcompensated. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to launch my little French touch dreaming script. Not like that. Like that. Okay, so what we're doing here, we're getting the Java Getting Started application from GitHub, which is like a tutorial repository that Salesforce provide. And I've basically just cloned that repository from GitHub and then just moved across to the right directory so that we're good to go. So at this point, we only have the application locally. There's not a great deal to see there. It's just a collection of files and folders as per any other project. But the fun starts when we actually start pushing it along to Heroku. So I'm going to do Heroku create ftd19 demo. That should be unique enough, except it needs to be lowercase. I always forget that, sorry. ftd19 Heroku demo. There we go. Okay, so this is actually creating a shell of an application on Heroku. So we're provisioning a Dino, I think by default a database, just to house our application. Please don't take forever. I am on the internet, good. There we go, so creating, done. So you can see there on the bottom we've got our URL of where our application is going to live. And if I get a mouse pointer going, if we click on that and move things to the right screen, like so, here's the shell of our application. Okay, not much to see. It's the default, but it shows you that that URL is now live. Not just for me, for you as well. I mean, if you're there with a laptop or a phone, you could quite easily visit that URL and see exactly the same page. So what we're going to do now, let's clear the screen because the laptop's in the way. We're going to actually move our code now to that Heroku application. So when we create that Heroku application, in fact I can demo this, it creates a Git remote for us. So we can see we've got origin at the top here, which is the GitHub repository that we pulled that down from originally. And we've also got a Heroku remote repository, which is the target of where we're going to push our application to. And so on that premise, I shall do git push Heroku master. And if I've typed that right, which I haven't, so when you push an application to Heroku's Git, not only does it actually check it in from a source control perspective, it also starts the build and deploy process. So here, it's downloading a whole bunch of dependencies, faster than the human eye can see. But this is all kind of part of how a Heroku application is built. So as part of today's talk, I'll talk about how we have that separation between configuration, dependency management, build and release. So you can see here, we've got the build, that's done. We're now compressing that build, and we're now launching that and releasing it onto that application. So far, so good. And there we go. So now, if we switch back to our browser and refresh, fingers crossed, we should get that Java sample application. Perfect. Okay, so exactly the same URL, we've just updated that site with our new code. So haven't done any coding, it's just a quick sample, but it is very good at illustrating how we move that code across to Heroku. We push the code, we get the dependencies, we build that code, we compress it, and we deploy it. So coming back to the presentation, somehow. Oh, I need a mouse pointer. Okay, perfect. So, one of the advantages that Heroku gives you, and this is where the kind of the enterprise scale factor comes in, is that you can scale larger. So you can scale with bigger dynos, scaling vertically. Or you can scale horizontally, so creating more dynos, more processes. And this again ties to the whole Heroku approach of how you build and scale your applications. The idea is that the Dinos should be able to operate in a discrete, isolated fashion, should have no dependencies on each other or anything else, and should work whether you've got one Dino running or 100 Dinos running. And hopefully my speaker notes are not on the screen, which is not helping. Bear with me a second. Okay, I think I'm good to go now. No. Always with the technical issues. 1 second. My slideshow's not moving on now either. Okay, so we're back on track. As mentioned earlier, you can additionally enrich your Heroku application with add-ons. And to borrow from Mehdi here, who presented earlier on Heroku, it is like an app exchange for Heroku. It's your add-ons and extensions that you can provision into your Heroku application to build on that functionality. Some of them have, well, most of them have free pricing tiers, limited, but it's a point of entry, especially in development mode. Many of them are provided by Heroku themselves. So you can see 3 across 2 down, Heroku Reedus as an example. As an example, again, the Swap My Swag site that I mentioned earlier that I built, we actually use Postgres for our back-end database. We use Papertrail to monitor our logs, SendGrid for sending our emails, and Cloudinary for managing our images. And all of these were just click provision, and they're all pretty much available to the application. So scaling further, we start looking at one of the other add-ons within the Heroku enterprise system, which is Heroku Kafka. So there's a big, long description there of Kafka that I lifted. But effectively, Kafka is a queue for messages. Now, those messages are very contextual. What event triggered the message? What produced the message? When did it happen? What are the data points on that message that I care about? You know, did I update the name field? Did I update the date field? Or you know, did I insert a record? Did I delete a record? Did I edit a record? So it's all around giving context. Those messages will sit on the queue, and they will be repeatable. You can replay them. They are stored chronologically. So you kind of have this sense of state around the system because these messages are in the queue. Those messages can be subscribed to, so you can have multiple subscribers to the same message. So if you have an event that fires from your system and you've got 3 other integrations that need to know about that's perfectly possible. So an example of some sort of types of events that you might have are page views, product views, sales, site logs. It's a common use case for queue-based messages. Internet of Things sensor values. Now there's a bit of overlap with the IoT cloud there, but if you want to sort of scale and you already have some existing integrations and footprint that you want to reuse, you can channel it through Kafka and Heroku. So there's quite a lot of ways in which we can actually capture events and a lot of use cases for them. So how does that actually work? So Kafka has this concept of being a broker. It receives messages from producers, and then it organizes them into topics. So topics are kind of much like the English sense of topics. They are things that you care about, that you're interested in, that you want to subscribe to. And those subscriptions are received by one or more consumers. Okay? Those topics can be organized into partitions, and the partitions are basically a subset of those topics so that we can get some sort of parallel processing, some concurrency. We can effectively load balance the topics so that we can have more producers feeding into the topics, we can have more consumers pulling out of the topics as well. And you would generally sort of deploy those groups to get the level of scalability for those messages. So a demo? Sadly not. Heroku Kafka is one of the Heroku add-ons that doesn't have a demo entry-level tier. So I'm not really able to demo that one on today's budget. But if you want to kind of take a picture with your camera phones of that link, there is a little demo that kind of breaks down the process and illustrates that. It ingests Twitter feeds and looks at sort of various keywords and tags, and then kind of does some real-time graphing on that. Plugging it into Salesforce, there's some great advantages in here. So the Heroku Connect product is a bi-directional sync between Salesforce and your Heroku Postgres database, which is the default data store for Heroku. It doesn't count towards your API limits. So yes, you have to pay for the product and get Heroku, but if you're trying to augment a very busy Salesforce org, not having to worry about the API limits for your integration is a big win. And it uses the platform intelligently. So it will probably issue, in a lot of use cases, it'll issue a REST API request to determine how many records it has to deal with, and then it'll break that up into batches that it can then use the bulk API to effectively manage. So it's very efficient, and you don't have to do that thinking. It does that thinking for you. So it's a great tool. It's point and click configured. You just define, I want field A, field B, field C, and I want it to go into this database and just map the fields across. So a great tool for those integrations. One of the key things that you're going to need to be aware of with Heroku is kind of how to build Heroku applications. It's not just the technical aspects in terms of what code, what buttons do I need to click, what packages do I need to deploy, but it's a mindset as well. So Heroku kind of coined the concept of the 12-factor application, which I will very quickly whiz through. I'm kind of mindful of time. Source control. You have one master source of truth. So much like the Salesforce DX approach, if anyone's kind of sat in on those sessions, have a single source-based source of truth. Declare your dependencies. Don't assume that your environment, your target Dinos, your Heroku instance has all the things it needs. Explicitly declare them via a config file and store that config as part of that environment, that part of that deployment. Treat your backing services as just additional libraries. So if you need to use Heroku Postgres as a database, declare it. Separate build, run, and release. We saw a bit of that. Heroku largely manages that for you. Everything should be a stateless process. Anything you need to remember from iteration to iteration, store it somewhere. Don't assume you have environment variables or files that you can drop to a desktop. Everything needs to move and be torn down and stood back up again at a whim, which ties into the disposability at number 9. Port binding, everything's an API, so make sure that it's reachable as such. Your scaling for your concurrency, we talked about vertical versus horizontal. Try and keep dev and prod as close as possible. If you're using like a desktop database for development and then you're deploying to a production grade cloud database, you may hit issues that you just didn't anticipate. Try and keep as much parity between dev and production as possible. So, looking at the clock, there is a lot of time. There is a lot of things that we don't have time to cover. Heroku Reedus is another product that is recommended for being like a cache, again, to squeeze more performance out of your system. There's a whole Heroku enterprise offering that gives you enterprise teams, so you can have multiple applications within your organization and allocate different development teams to them. Private spaces for when you don't want to be out there on the internet, on the public cloud, and really want to lock it down to your specific IPs. Heroku Shield, which gives you that additional level of regulatory compliance in various industries. There's SSO, there's routing and pairing with other clouds. So if you want to integrate with your existing AWS or Google Cloud Platform footprint within your business, that's also possible as well. So there's a lot to discover there that we don't have time for, but there is a bunch of links there for you to take a photo of to dive deeper. The Heroku Dev Center is the source of truth for your documentation on Heroku. There's a trailhead around it. The trailheads are pretty lightweight and introductory at the moment, but they will be growing. Heroku Kafka has documentation in its own right. There's the Heroku Architecture Designer Certification, if you really want to pick this up and run with it. I attempted it on Wednesday. Didn't get it, only just. But it does cover a whole breadth of everything you're likely to encounter with a Heroku implementation for your customers, clients, employers. There's some great video content using Heroku Connect for complex data processing, which again shows how people are scaling out Heroku by using Kafka, queuing up the messages and making sure that they can scale the load to handle those messages. And then finally, if you do want to go for that Heroku Designer exam, there's a great preparation video from one of the technical architect principals at Salesforce that does a bit of a dive on some of the topics that you're going to need to cover on there. So we're a smidgen over time for Q&A, but I am here all day to pick up any questions. I appreciate that was a very quick run through of a very deep topic. There's a lot of content to Heroku. There's a lot of ways in which you can scale it, and a lot of the architecture skill is knowing whether you need to scale up bigger or whether you need to scale out more dynos to get the sort of right structure of the workloads that you're going to take. But hopefully that gives you a flavour of some of the approaches that you can take to that. Thank you very much.